Hello, welcome back to the studio. Today, of course, we're painting this lovely old stone bridge, inspired by a photograph that I took some time ago in one of my favourite places, Dorset. It's a county in the south of England. This is actually near a place called Corfe Castle, which today is just a ruin. The castle was destroyed by an ogre who was visiting on a day trip. He tried to buy an ice cream from a man at the gates, but the man at the gates said, "There's no ice cream for ogres like you." In a rage, the ogre left and strode to nearby Portland Bill quarry, where he picked up huge rocks and hurled them across the county, destroying the castle. He never came back for an ice cream, and to this day, you still can't buy an ice cream at the gates of Corfe Castle, for fear that the ogre will return. In the meantime, let's paint this lovely bridge. It's straight out of a fairy tale.
So here's my canvas, 16 by 20, painted with grey gesso. I'm going to be using this bridge painting as inspiration. Corfe Castle in Dorset, and I want to see if I can get a bit of an underpainting done first. But I need a shape. I've gone around the house and picked up a few items that I think will work. I drew some on some paper and tested the size against my canvas. I think this size works the best. So I just use a pencil. I've positioned my little bridge sort of roughly central in my painting. I want it to be a main feature. I also want it to be a little taller, so I've extended the lines a bit. I freehand the top of the bridge, so again, nothing special. This is a very simple version of the painting. It doesn't need to be too complicated. And here you see the difference between the water in the background and in the foreground. The materials I'm using here is just a cast sponge. I've got some black and white acrylic paint for a change. I'm using that cast sponge, which is nicely textured, to stipple on some paint. I want a nice bright spot in the far right hand side, and of course I want to remember that the light comes down and under the bridge as well. I also want to put some light coming across the surface of the water. Let's make a nice pale grey colour next. I want this to be sort of progressively getting darker from right to left. And these are some little trees that are overhanging the bright spot. As you see, I add more and more black acrylic paint to my sponge. This technique also works well with black and white gesso. It just happened to be the acrylic is what I picked up first. I also want to put in a nice dark tree on the right hand side and some bushes down at the base, and this will frame my little bridge painting. I also want to put in the suggestion of some distant trees. I use a synthetic liner brush with a few drops of water, drop in the suggestion of a tree trunk and some branches. I'm going to be covering this with some foliage, so I don't spend too long on it. But take care. What grows out the top of the bridge should also appear on the riverbank. I know, I nearly forgot to put them in. Yes, that's where they should be. Drop one in here and make sure there's some continuity. You don't want them to be sort of standing in the wrong places. It'll really throw your eye when you look at it. I've switched to a small flat synthetic brush for the next stage, which is part of the bridge. I want to do the underside of the bridge with some deeper shadow. I've mixed a nice dark grey colour and I just want to block this in. As we come down to the left, I'll add a little more white to my mixture so it looks like a reflection from the surface of the water. Remember, this is an old stone bridge, so this needs to be done very roughly. No fine detail here, just block it in. We'll add more detail later on in the painting. For the main section of the bridge, I just use black acrylic. And as you see, I scrub it on very roughly. Once again, this will be covered with detailed stones later on, so at this point I just need it blocked in. I leave a little bit of a relief line between the shadow and the black, just here. It gives me some separation. I finish off the sides of the bridge with some more of that sponge work. Now don't forget, I also need a little riverbank in the background. I think it's about time I added a reflection of the bridge into the water. Yes, it's bravery test time. I use my sponge and a little bit of the black and just draw an arc. Again, it doesn't have to be too accurate, just the rough shape is all we're looking for. I'll block it in with a little bit more sponge work, and I think that's about right, but I stood back and looked from the other side of the room and I can't think that that arch would be showing such a long shadow, so I decided to shorten it up a little bit. There.
So, my underpainting is complete, and as you saw, I just used household items to achieve it. You don't need expensive things to do a simple underpainting like this. This, just a roll of tape I had laying around, and this, a piece of car sponge. I just doctored a bit with a pair of pliers and just sort of give it a bit of a pluck, just to get a bit more texture on it. I keep things as easy and as simple to do as possible, so that you can reproduce this and make your own painting. Now, let's start adding some oils.
I left my unpainting to dry for a good hour. Do make sure it is completely dry before you start moving on to oils. And for this, I'm using Bob Ross Liquid Clear Oil Paint. I have some in a small airtight container, and I'm going to be using this, an old Bob Ross 1-inch brush, to scrub on a very thin coat. This is something you've seen me do on many of my other paintings, and it's essential that you do apply such a thin coat that it is just a light sheen. If it's too wet, you'll struggle to make the colour stick. Here I'm just using the flashlight on my mobile phone to show you how I run my finger across the canvas and it barely leaves a trace. It's not so easy though when you're testing the white areas of your painting or the brighter areas. These areas often end up with either too much liquid clear or sometimes get missed completely, so take extra care when you're testing your canvas. I'm going to be using this old 1-inch brush for the next stage, but I want to get rid of all of this surplus liquid clear in the bristles. Here's my palette: titanium white, phthalo blue, sap green and a little bit of Indian yellow. And I want to put in a nice sort of misty blue colour for my background. Just a tiny bit of titanium white and a speck of the phthalo blue. It's a very powerful colour. I just want a hint of it for my background. Now I'm going to scrub this on very, very thinly because I know titanium white is an opaque colour. It should cover things up completely. But as you see, by applying it very thinly and adding a hint more blue here and there, it becomes sort of semi-transparent. It gives a lovely misty effect. Don't forget to also add some to the watery areas. That'll be a recurring theme in our painting. I also want to add a nice lime green colour to my background. I use that same brush. Sap green, touch of Indian yellow. Again, this is just really like a wash of colour. No detail here, I just want to scrub it on, just to create a sort of a bit of a mood. Give it a swirl and a twirl. And as I come to the left, I dry clean my brush and add more sap green and Indian yellow to the painting. You see, I've gone a little bit brighter with that Indian yellow colour, so I better do some continuity above the bridge as well. Having got the first wash of colour on, it's time to add an underpainting. And for this, I want to do a sort of soft misty underpainting. Sap green, touch of white and some black. I want this to sort of be a sort of slightly pale washed out green colour, so not the full dark tone, hence the reason why I used a little drop of white. I'm using that old brush again and I'm just pushing into the paint. Notice how I favour that right hand corner of my brush. It'll be that I'm using to do the texturing with. I tip the brush onto that right hand corner and just touch in the suggestion of a few branches. This is a technique known as corner of the brush, for obvious reasons. I want to put some foliage on this tree. And again, I just go here and there and leave the odd branch showing through. Once again, as I work from right to left, I'll darken that mixture. I'll take a little more black into the colour using my brush. By the time I get to the far left hand side, I'll be doing almost completely dark green. Keep on favouring that one right hand side. As you see here, it's almost completely black or very dark green. Now, I'm going to favour the left hand corner, and this is for the tree on the right. As you see, I just want to touch in the suggestion of a few branches with this lovely dark textured paint. We'll add some highlights to that in a moment. For some soft, delicate highlights, I need a nice, clean, fresh brush, preferably one that's not too worn. Special note here, I pull my brush one direction through the paint to sort of create a bit of a curtain of colour. But load just one side of the brush, don't turn it over. As you notice, I push the brush up into the paint, favouring a right-hand corner. That's it for the trees on the left. As you see, the dark sticky underpainting grabs the highlight colour from the brush. It just leaves a few speckles of colour. You need to reload your brush frequently. If you notice, there's a little dot of bright yellow paint on the end of my brush, almost like a limey colour. I reload my brush, but that little dot of colour comes back. I quite like it. It looks fun. But do take care when you're loading your brush, because sometimes it can get away from you. I use the same technique on the other side, but of course tipping the brush onto the left-hand corner. Notice that little dot of greeny yellow paint isn't present. Don't forget, add a little touch of highlight to the bushes in the background under the bridge as well, and a little bit of colour on the riverbank. Time to paint the bridge. Let's choose our weapons. I've got a choice of things: palette knives, filbert brushes, but I think I might stick to this little brush. It's the synthetic flat brush I used to do the underpainting in acrylics. I want to mix up a marble mix. White, dark sienna, maybe a little Van Dyke brown on black, and even a little bit of yellow ochre maybe, later on. Top tip, don't overmix this. Leave it nice and marbly. You see, I'm just taking a small amount of this paint on the flat of the brush. Let's have a quick look at our reference picture. I've made it black and white so you can see more clearly that there is a line of stones around the inner edge of the bridge. The centermost stone is called the keystone. It's the one that holds the bridge together. I'll do a little bit of tie-ups here because I'm actually building these little stones up and then trying to work out where the little stones are going to fit in between. This takes some time to work out. You'll see in a moment that, well, maybe it didn't go quite as planned.
So here's my painting so far. Am I pleased with my background? I like the little trees. I like the little touch of blue light coming under the bridge. I think that works quite well. But the actual bridge, well, it all looks a bit sort of new. I wanted it to look sort of slightly older, more sort of ancient stone. So it's time to texturise. I think I'll try an old fan brush. Dabbed in a bit of dark black and brown and just sort of dabbed over it a bit. I'll see if I can roughen up the surface a little bit. It's what I've done in the past. Let's try it again. Oh, by the way, this is my second attempt at painting the stones on this bridge. I didn't like the first attempt either. Okay, on with the painting.
I decided to start over and used a baby wipe to take off the paint that I'd applied. Let's have another go. Once again, a nice dark grey colour, but I'm going to have a practice on my palette. Just get a feel for it. This isn't such a bad idea. I suggest that you do the same on your own paintings. Spend a few minutes with a little bit of paper and just make some random marks and shapes, and then start over again. Here's the keystone, and I'll add some more detail around as before. This time though, I'm going to be much more random. I want these to look really old and aged stones. I'll put a little bit more yellow ochre into some of them, even a touch of dark sienna. Now, time to age these stones a little more. I've got an old fan brush. I'm going into some Van Dyke brown and black, just sort of stabbing into the paint. I want a little bit of each, and I'm going to just tap over these stones. In between, add a little bit of texture to them. Break up some of the patterns and sharp edges. This is good fun. Once you start though, you can't stop. I'll darken a few stones here, maybe make a few disappear. The more you do, the more you see how you can turn your bridge from new build to ancient. I'll flash up a little reminder of how the bridge looked before we started this aging process. It's quite miraculous how just adding a few dabs of colour can change the look of the painting. But as I said, this gets to be fun. And after you've added a few more stones and a bit more aging, well, it's hard to stop. You almost don't want to stop. But you can overdo it. So, time to stop. So put down the brush. I said, put down the brush. I said, put down... Oh, you'll break it. Luckily I stopped just in time. I've gone into some sap green, touch of Indian yellow. I want a nice bright, limey, mossy colour. In between some of the stones, I want to add the suggestion of a little bit of vegetation. Some mosses and lichens. Once again, just like adding dark texture, this is fun. And if you're not careful, you can end up with a green bridge. Not so bad really, but again, do a little, stand back, do a little more. I want to make my colours really sing. I've added a touch of white to my limey green colour, and I'm going to load it onto the very edge of my fan brush. Just here, above the bridge, the sunlight's catching the mosses. I left a little black edge there as a shadow line. As you see, this light colour really shows up against the dark background. It's the reason why I left it nice and shadowy back there. This is definitely an ah moment. When your painting comes alive. I hope you enjoy some of these with your own paintings. It's just a wonderful feeling when you just do that magic touch and things just, well, they spring into life. Once again, this is fun and you almost don't want to stop doing it, but add a little and stand back and then add a little more and sort of savour it. A bit like eating some of your favourite food or reading a good book. You just don't want it to end. So take your time with it and really enjoy it. Time to add more detail to the bridge. I want a nice sort of pale blue-grey colour here. This is for some stonework under the bridge. Here, I think the light is reflecting back from the water and just brighten things up a little bit. Once again, keep it lovely and random. No particular pattern here, just a few random strokes is all you need. We know the secret sauce now. A few dabs of dark green and black, and soon it'll look as aged and old as the rest of the bridge. If you enjoy my tutorials, don't forget, hit the little thumbs up button, and you can subscribe to the channel so you know when the future videos are being released. Don't forget, ring the little bell icon. If you want to go a little further, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee. There's a link in the description below, and I spend all the money on new painting supplies. Thank you. Let's add another little dose of magic to the outside edge of the bridge. Once again, I think the mosses and lichens there will be catching the light. One final step. Let's do something about the edge of the bridge. I want to just break up that lovely sharp line. I'll use some black Van Dyke Brown. Put a few extra cracks and creases here and there. It's the finishing touch to an aged bridge. In the background, I'll use a little bit of dark sienna, touch of Van Dyke Brown, and that little flat brush, just to add in a bit of a muddy bank. Let this drift in to the water areas so it doesn't look too hard. Now, let's increase the sort of depth of sparkle and shine on the water. For this, I need to use my little homemade marl stick because my hand's not that steady. And just here, I want to indicate a bit more of a shimmer of light. I'm using a liner brush and some white tinted with some blue. I'll add the little shimmer right through to the foreground. I'll also go back and add the shimmer of a little bit of bright limey green colour as well. I'll use a little touch of Van Dyke Brown and Black just to increase the reflection of the bridge on the water as well. I also want to add some stone and rock detail to the reflection, but I don't want to go too far with it. Remember, all these reflections are going to be distorted. Rippling water doesn't really produce an exact mirror image. If it was perfectly still, then you could, but I just want this to look just like a loose representation. Now for a little more magic, I've got my old 1-inch brush here. It's got a highlight on it from the trees and bushes, and just at the edge of the reflection, I want to press and pull straight down. It's a classic Bob Ross reflection technique. Here, I just want to get that little bright edge to show up on the water. That's it, a little touch more cad yellow in my mix. I'll drag this down, and then I'll brush across. But there's a challenge here. My liquid clear is starting to dry. It feels a little bit sticky. I'll try brushing across with the 1-inch brush, and it does move a little, but it's beginning to get a bit smudgy. So here's a little tip for you. Use that little flat brush, a little touch of black and Van Dyke Brown, and just brush across and produce a few extra ripple details that way. There. And I think that'll bring the watery areas to a nice finish. Let's turn our attention to the riverbank. I use my fan brush and some nice dark green. I'm going to use the corner of my fan brush and I like sort of tapping action just to indicate some foliage. But don't lose all the lovely dark shadows here. It's very easy to over highlight it. As you see, I leave more dark than I do highlights. I'll come back to this area in a moment, but have a think about what we could do with it. Now, I just can't resist it. I think a few rays of sunlight just catch the top of some of these bushes. As it goes down below the level, I'll actually get this to be darker again. I don't know about you, but I think this patch of mottled grey and black looks just like a piece of rock, maybe a piece of granite. As Bob would say, it's a happy accident. I think it works very well for my painting. I'll add a few more bits of vegetation, maybe a flower or two around it as well. I want to add one more little detail to this bank. I've gone into some yellow ochre with a touch of white. I think there might be a little bush here catching some rays of sunlight as well. As I go down into the shadowy areas, I'll darken this colour slightly. To finish off the bank, I use a filbert brush and a touch of Van Dyke Brown and Black. I just want to increase the depth of shadow here where the water meets the land. I'll also add a little bit of extra shadow here. Again, it separates the bridge from the water. But first, a few little touches of highlight. Yes, I can't resist it. Adding a few more sparkles. Well, it's what painting's all about. Having those aha moments and adding in a little bit of extra. Let's add a few waterlines. I'm going to use the short blade of my palette knife, and keeping the blade nice and level, I just want to rub it against the canvas. This doesn't want to be too bright. Again, a lot of this is in shadow. The further to the back it goes, the brighter it gets. Back in here, it will be catching the light. Anything that's too bright, just simply run your knife over a few times and sort of dull it down. Now, what about this side? Well, I think I'm going to carry on using the corner of the brush technique. I'll darken it up using some of that sap green, black, and the rest of my phthalo blue. Again, this is a way of texturing the canvas, adding a dark sticky layer that a highlight will stick to. I've gone back to my nice 1-inch brush that I did the original highlights on the trees with. I'm just about to have another happy accident. I'm just going to tap with the corner of my brush here and build up a nice layer of foliage. I'll reload my brush and add some more foliage here. Layer upon layer upon layer, and see if you can see what I can see. I stand back and I think this area here looks like maybe an old stone wall or an embankment, overgrown with vegetation. And in front of it, more rocks leading down to the edge of the water. I'll add a few more sparkles of highlight to really make it stand out. Bob Ross was famous for his sticks and twigs, and my painting could do with a few. I've used a liner brush, a little drop of linseed oil, white, dark sienna, some Van Dyke brown, and I'll just add a little bit of supporting structure here, a few sticks and twigs between the bushes. Adding these little details really helps to improve the quality of your painting, so spend a good amount of time adding them. People love to see this level of detail in your work. And with my signature, I have a finished painting, the old stone bridge at Corfe Castle.
So there you have it, my version of a lovely stone bridge in Dorset. But don't move, there's some more lovely videos coming right along. By the way, no ice creams